Hey, this is Dr. Corey Glenn with Blue Sky Bio, and I'm going to be doing a review of the Blue Sky Bio digital denture module. And this is going to be in version 4.7.55. So, depending on when you find this on the interwebs, you may want to check the date and see if there's a more recent video. But we'll go ahead and review what the functionality is right now. And as new updates come out, I'll continue to update this. But really, overall, what we're trying to accomplish is the same end result, the same quality, the same strength that we would get from conventionally processed, conventional method dentures, but be able to do that all digitally. So do the setup digitally, do the fabrication of the bases, and then be able to either 3D print or mill those bases and the teeth, which should give a really, really nice result. So let's go ahead and talk about how do you acquire the data, because obviously you can't really jump into the digital software unless you first digitize the data. Just a pair of stone casts is not going to get you very far. So I really recommend a desktop scanner for most denture type work. You can use an intraoral scanner, but they do tend to not be as good. Intraoral scanners take really small field of view images, and the accuracy of them stitching together properly is dependent on having lots of common data, lots of unique data, and when you have teeth, that provides it. But when you're doing dentures, you're scanning mostly smooth surfaces, and you can end up with a lot of cross-arch error in the scanning of those with an intraoral. So I like a desktop scanner because these are going to allow you to take shots that capture the entire stone model or impression with each shot, and there's going to be fewer images and fewer stitches and thus less error. So there's plenty of desktop scanners on the market. The two that I have the most experience with are the two that Blue Sky Bio sells. We made our own scanner called the DS3D, and it's about $2,500 or so, and it does anything that you would need to do as far as dentures are concerned, in addition to most crown and bridge type things, implant related things. And the other one that I've got the most experience with is the Shining 3D AutoScan DSEX. And this one's going to be comparable in quality. This one is a little faster. It's also a little bit more expensive. Blue Sky does sell both of these. The Shining 3D one is about $5,000. With both of these, you can stick an entire articulator in there to get a buccal bite, which is useful in dentures because, again, unless you can close them into an articulator, if it's just two stone models, you're not going to have a way to orient them to capture the occlusal relationship. So I would suggest using a desktop scanner like one of these, and these two are the most affordable ones on the market. Again, Blue Sky is about $2,500, Shining $5,000. The next steps up are going to be roughly around the $10,000 mark and go up from there. So both of these are an excellent deal. Now I'm going to go through just four simple options for how you can acquire that data, because there's a lot of different methods that people use to capture master impressions and vertical and all that. I'm just going to show the four that I use most often. And the first one is just what you've probably done most of your career, which is to do conventional master impressions, make some bite rims, and then figure out where the occlusal plane, the midline, the commissures, and the occlusal relationship and VDO are. And once you have that, you can simply put the casts into the bite rims, mount it, and then scan those mounted casts. I like to also do a scan of the bite rim itself, because that way you're transferring over the data of where the occlusal plane belongs. And so this would be the type of data you would get if you chose that method, and this is going to be most similar to your workflow currently. Okay, so you can still do everything the same way that you do now, only when you get the steps or the cast mounted, then you can go ahead and scan at that point. So when we do that, we'll end up with an upper master impression, a lower master impression, and then you could toggle on and off this blue model, which is the bite rims. And if you're wondering where to set the midline, you can simply set it right here. If you need to see the occlusal plane, you can set it right here. So that's a very easy method, and probably the easiest for people starting out. The next option, and my favorite and the fastest method, is when they have an acceptable existing denture. So think about the cases where the patient just wants a backup. They want to maybe make minor tweaks in shade or tooth position or tooth mold. Well, there's no reason to start from scratch because most of the work is already done for you in that. So with this, it's super simple and fast. All you're going to do is go ahead and take a reline wash impression inside of the upper and the lower, and then record the bite again. And then we can simply scan these as impressions and digitize it in that way. So this is an example of the data you would get from that. Once again, we have upper and lower master impressions. And here it's a little nicer because when you toggle on the buccal bite, which is the dentures related together, you'll be able to see and reference those existing tooth positions. So if I wanted to move a midline 2 millimeters to the left, I can simply toggle this on and make that change. If I need to make a change in the tooth molds and I don't want to move their overall position, it makes the setting really easy because I can just turn this on and reference it, set the teeth in the same position, but maybe use a different mold. So that's my favorite method. Now this one is a less commonly known method. I've shown this on my YouTube channel if you're interested in this, but that is to modify their dentures if they come in and they have a non-ideal set. So if you look at that image on the top left, those are a set of dentures that a lady came in with. They're 20 plus years old. They've obviously got lots of problems. The bite relationship is all messed up. The VDO has collapsed. But she did like the tissue fit and borders. And even if she hadn't, I'm not going to start from ground zero with custom trays and all that. I can modify her existing denture into a custom tray. So I like to just duplicate those. This was more when I was sending it to the lab. Now, if I was doing this, I could just do this on her original denture and then peel all this off once I've scanned it in one visit. But what we'll do here is either duplicate or not the non-ideal dentures. And first we need to get the internal fit right. So I'll start with doing a wash reline impression inside of those. Do good border molding. Make sure you capture all the anatomic landmarks, the critical landmarks, especially if they weren't captured in the originals. And then once we've done that, we can actually cut back with a blade all of the excess impression material that extruded onto the teeth. And with that done, if we need to make changes now in the occlusal relationship or the bite relationship or the VDO, we could simply modify these with wax. And so here you see that I've just added wax right over the duplicate teeth. And we can just open them up until they're in the correct vertical, capture a new bite. You can do all of the same things with your Fox plane of setting the occlusal plane to where it needs to be, marking the midline, and now you have a record in the very first time that you see them of everything you need to now go to a try-in. Okay, so we could scan this in, and that's going to give us all of the same data that we previously had if you were just scanning casts and bite rims that were mounted. Okay, so that's a great way of doing it. And the fourth and final option, it was pretty rare that someone comes with no teeth and they don't have an existing denture. I didn't encounter that situation too often, but I just hated to start over from ground zero and have to start with primaries and then master impressions and all of that stuff. So this was kind of a hack that I found that worked really well for me, and that is to use the Joe Masad thermoplastic trays. And with those, you can put them in, heat mold them, get a semi-custom fit, and then you can go about adding some tissue stops, and you can border mold those. So once I have that, I'll do a master wash impression. So this is the final master impression. Do that upper and lower. And nothing about that is too unique. What I would do from there, though, to expedite this is that I would then cut the handle off, cut off all the excess material on the outside of the trays. And just like I've shown in the previous method, I would add wax right over the top of that, what would be the external of the tray, just as if it were a bite rim. And I would add wax until I established the occlusal plane, mark the midline, and for the lower, and capture the vertical dimension. So once again, once we get this, we can simply scan this data in, and we would have all that we need to now go to our design software. So let's now jump over to the software and go through how we would conduct this case and plan it in the software.
Okay, so when you download and open Blue Sky Plan for the first time, this is the home screen. You can see there's multiple modules, but what we're going to be doing is a denture, so we'll go ahead and click on dentures. And the first step is to import your models. So we'll go ahead and find the folder that has the upper and lower master models and the buccal bite. And as you can see, we've got those 3 files present here. Now don't do these one at a time. You actually want to hold down Control and left click all of the models that you want to bring in, and we'll bring them all in together. What you don't want to do is have to sit there and individually bring them in and then spend the time realigning them one to another. So this is much more efficient. Now this is the step where we're going to align the models, and you've got some different methods here that we can use for alignment. We're going to click on the one that says edentulous and then continue to alignment. And let me jump back here and just point out that you could click on any 3 of these models, select the model that is highlighted up here. And I would always choose for dentures the maxilla, because that's the one that has the landmarks that are most useful for orienting this. So we'll continue to alignment. And what it's asking us to do here is to align the model by indicating 3 points. And the points it's going to ask for is what's known as the hip plane, or the hamular notches and incisive papilla. There's a lot of literature on that shows that the occlusal plane is parallel to the hip plane in roughly 80% of people. So that becomes a really useful thing to know if you're trying to align models. So we'll start just like the picture indicates. We'll hold down the Shift button, and we're going to click in this hamular notch. And then it tells us to click on the middle of the incisive papilla. Click there, and then finally we'll click on the other hamular notch. And as you can see, it's going to automatically throw this model into that orientation where it is centered on this grid. Okay, and we'll click continue. Now we have the opportunity to make any tweaks. So if I think that that looks like it's rotated a little too far, I can tweak that. If I want to see all of the models in relationship to one another, I can turn them all on. And let's suppose that we want to just set and replicate the occlusal plane that's on this existing set of dentures. Then I'm going to basically align these models to where the occlusal plane is sitting right on the horizontal component of this grid, and then where it is symmetrical from left to right. And this looks like it needs to go up a little bit, and we still need to bring the posteriors down just a little. Okay, so that's looking closer to what I'm after. And then I want the incisal edges right on the horizontal plane as well. And finally, let's assume that you've marked the midline, which almost always, if you're doing this method or if you're using bite rims, you'll have marked the midline. So just hypothetically, let's say that this existing set of dentures, the midline was 1 millimeter off to the patient's left. So I could take this opportunity to align that vertical component of the grid, not to the existing midline, but to move it over 1 millimeter. And I am eyeballing that, but that's good enough for me. So once I've done this, you see all 3 models have gotten aligned simultaneously. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. And now the models are oriented. If you ever need to turn that grid back on, it's just right here, and we can show the grid at any step in this process. This is particularly useful when maybe all you've got is a set of upper and lower models and you don't necessarily have a good bite rim that shows the occlusal plane. Then I would simply start as a baseline by aligning to the hip plane and following these principles, and then just set the teeth right on the plane. And as far as how they conform to the arch, I would make sure that the lowers are sitting over the ridge, and then let the upper extrapolate from that. Okay, so notice that we are still in the model editing module right now. If you needed to close models, if you needed to do any number of model modifications, this would be the time to do them. I don't need to do that here since my models are already closed except for the very top, which doesn't matter. So all I'm going to do is click Next up here to go to the Denture Design portion. Okay, so the first thing it will prompt you to do is to indicate the teeth that you want. Now, it's important to point out that we have the option of virtual teeth. So when you're thinking virtual teeth, think about the fact that you're going to either print or mill these, okay? You've also got the option to do physical teeth. So let's say that you like to use conventional PMMA denture teeth. We do have libraries in here of different denture teeth. These happen to just be the Nobilium teeth, which I think are an excellent tooth. They're very economical at about $5 a card. I would like to get most of the manufacturer's teeth into the software at some point. They're just going to have to come around and realize that this is helpful to them, because we're not a threat to people setting this and then instead of purchasing the teeth, they just mill them. Because one of the important things to know, and why I point this out, is if you choose physical teeth, then you're going to plan it with the mold. You'll see them and all of the stuff that you need to do to set them. But when you go to export them, we've protected these, right? That's for protection of the tooth manufacturer, so that basically people can't rip them off and use their beautiful shapes, but then just go mill or print them. So when you do physical teeth sets, it will make the base, it will make the sockets into which you'll precisely position these teeth, but you will have to purchase those teeth from the manufacturer. You're not going to be able to export those. If you do want to print or mill teeth, that's why we have different libraries for virtual teeth. These are not patent protected or anything like that. You can scale them up or down in size. You can alter them and move them around. These are at your full disposal. So we've got a bunch of different libraries, different clinicians who've made really nice libraries, Christian Brennis, Mitch Hurst, Dave Veege, Bastien Deloge. Just for the heck of it, I'm going to use the Bastien Deloge library on these. This being a male patient, I like these teeth. They're square shaped. And so I can select these teeth. And what I want to do is select all the maxillary teeth and all the mandibular teeth. Okay, and if you want to select both, then you just select all teeth. Okay, I generally don't mess with the medium, small, large. If I need to scale the teeth once I get them into the case, I'll just scale them after the fact when I can actually see the models. So I'm going to click OK. And as I do that, you see now that I have a tooth hovering under my mouse. And what I need to do now is go over, and this looks like a upper left incisor, so I'm just going to go to the area of the left incisor and hold down Shift and click. You'll have to do that to drop the library into the case. And as you see, it drops the entire library. Now this is where one of the things that makes the Blue Sky module unique compared to others, in that these teeth are already preset to their ideal occlusion. You don't have to go in and tweak them. The occlusion is already perfect. The arch form is set to a standard U-shaped arch form, and I can basically take these now and move them globally, all the teeth at once, maintaining that occlusion, and we're going to scoot those into position to conform to the design principles we're wanting to do. So remember here again, I've positioned all my models in relation to this grid, so that if I put the vertical component going right through the middle of number 8 and 9, then I know I'll have my midline correct. And then as far as the occlusal, if I just make sure that they are sitting on this occlusal plane on the horizontal component, then basically everything should be lined up. So I can bring this down slightly, and that is the vast majority of my setup. Now, once I do that, I'm going to look here before I get out of this function, because when you look from the lateral, you're going to know whether or not these teeth are scaled to this arch or not. So when I look at this, clearly these are too big for this arch, for this particular patient, okay? So I've got two options. Do I like the overall size of the teeth but need to eliminate some teeth? If so, I could right-click on maybe the second molars and just delete them in the tooth surfaces panel. If I think that I want to keep my second molars and scale down everything overall, then again, while we're still in this denture panel, you'll see a scale slider. So as I take this down to the left, I'm scaling the teeth overall down to the shape of this particular arch, okay? I know based on his existing denture that I don't want to come out more facial than where those teeth are. So that is the anterior extent to which I can bring those teeth. And when I look here, it's still got the second molar really, really close to that retromolar pad. Just think of it in terms of when you look in a mouth every day, you know where a second molar is in relation to a retromolar pad. So now I can start deciding, do I want to continue scaling it down, or do I want to maybe eliminate second molars? Okay, so this is where it's useful to turn the transparency on your buccal bite, right? You've got the ability to right-click any model and turn the transparency or the visibility on or off. And the tooth shape was pretty good on these, okay? So I don't need to necessarily go bigger on tooth shape. And it looks like right now, if I was to turn on the full visibility, the teeth are pretty close in size, okay? So I don't really want to go smaller with the size of the teeth because these looked good in his face. So if I've decided that, and yet I know that it's going too far posteriorly, now that tells me that I probably ought to go ahead and eliminate second molars. So I'll go ahead and do that. You've got a tooth surfaces panel. If you don't see that, just like in surgical guide module, you can come up here to panels, and there's only 4 panels, and you're basically pretty much only going to use the Denture Design and the tooth STL surfaces. So this gives me a big list of all of the different teeth that I've got along with all the STL models. And I'm going to just search through here, and wherever there's a second molar, I'm going to just delete it by clicking the red X. We'll go down here and find the next one, delete it, the next one, delete it, and then finally the last one, and delete that. Okay, so now this is looking much more to my liking. Okay, I do need to bring the whole arch down just a bit more to sit on that horizontal plane. So if I need to do that, back in the Denture Design panel, move the entire tooth chain. Now this is something that you will run into. If you've defined a tooth chain, which happened when you imported them, and then you go and delete some of those, well, now you've broken the chain, and the software still needs to know how to hinge teeth off of one another. So if you get this warning, just come up here with all the teeth visible and click the button that says mark the visible teeth for chaining. Now that chain is reestablished and we can continue on our way. Okay, so I'm going to get this where the occlusal plane is sitting on that horizontal, and again, my midline needs to be on the space between number 8 and 9. So a little bit more right there. The overall scale looks good. We're matching his existing teeth, so that looks good. If you don't know, what size teeth to bring in, maybe they have no existing dentures to relate to, measure the width of their nose, and that should correspond to the width of their 6 anterior teeth. Okay, so now the overall VDO is established. The general tooth position and the cant and all of that stuff has been established. All we need to do now is to make sure that the teeth are conformed to this actual ridge shape. Remember, this is set to an existing just average arch. So if you've got a patient with a really U-shaped arch or a much more V-shaped arch, you'll need to tweak that a little bit. Now the way I do that is by referencing the lower arch. So I'm going to right click this upper model, and I'm going to click on toggle visibility and turn that off. I also don't need the grid at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the grid. And now I can look at this and see these teeth in relation to the jaw. So it looks like my lowers are very close to the ridge. I like that. The posterior teeth are pretty well conformed, honestly, to the shape of this patient's arch. I'm not going to have to do a lot of tweaking here. I might do just a little bit, because particularly on this side, it is too far lingual. This side is just a hair too far buccal, okay? So remember, when I was referencing his denture, we like the anterior position of the teeth. We just need to change the posterior position. So I'm going to turn on the button that says show and hide the tooth chain. When you do that, you're going to get a bunch of dots that come up. And what I want to do is lock this at, you could lock it at the canine or the lateral. I'm going to lock this on both sides at the lateral incisor because I think the canine could come back a little too. And now we've got the ability to hinge off of this, okay? Now you can choose to hinge just the lower by itself. So if I wanted to just hinge the lower, then what I'll do is look from whatever direction you want, and I'm going to hold down the shift button and then click on the tooth just behind where I locked. And now I can move this. I describe it like it's moving a barn door. You're just swinging it like a hinge off of that. And I'll do one side this way and one side the other way. So when I'm looking at this, I want to more or less have a straight line from the canine tip and on the functional cusps back to the retromolar pad. okay? And we've done that. Obviously, I didn't move the upper arch with it, and so if I do that, I'm going to also have to lock the upper arch at the lateral and move this over, okay? So you know where teeth belong, hopefully, and you would want these oriented such that the functional cusp of the maxillary molar is in the center of the opposing mandibular tooth. If I'm in doubt of that, I can look maybe from behind here, and that looks pretty darn good. You can see my cuspal relationship here. So we've got that side done. Very quick to do this setup. I mean, if you've just got your Bunsen burner out if you're doing this with old school physical wax, right? So for this left side, instead of doing each arch independently, I'm going to go ahead and check these two boxes right here, the keep opposing arch in occlusion and the move opposing tooth. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'll go to the tooth just behind the one that I locked. And if you locked a mandibular tooth and you're hinging that, you need to be clicking on a mandibular tooth. You're not going to be able to click this upper lateral and move both of these. So I'm going to click on this canine, bring this out buccally just slightly. So I'm just trying to get those functional cusps again lined up to go over the mandibular ridge and for those functional cusps to be on a line from the canine tip to the retromolar pad. Still need to come just a hair lingually. Okay, I'm liking that. And now we can go ahead and proceed with our setup. Now, in dentures, the most important attribute for mandibular denture stability is that those teeth be centered over the ridge. Okay, so I want to set those first and then let the uppers follow from that. I do still want to turn back on this green model. Okay, actually, I'm sorry, the yellow model, because we've already referenced the existing dentures all I want. And I'm just wanting to make sure that there's not just some huge arch discrepancy. You know, if I've done this and set the mandibular and the maxillary teeth over the ridge, and they've got some tiny, tiny little maxilla, and I see that there's, you know, a 10 millimeter gap between the ridge of the maxilla and these teeth, I probably need to start thinking about maybe setting these in end-to-end occlusion or maybe even crossbite. Because again, that's going to fit that patient's face a lot better. But this looks excellent. I have no problem proceeding with this. So that's the entire setup. Now, if you're not talking like I am and you're just getting to work and not demonstrating, then you can really do these setups in, I would say if you're taking more than 3 minutes, revisit your process because something's going wrong. 3 minutes is about the most I would expect to spend on doing the setup in the software, okay? So we're ready at this point to go ahead and fabricate some dentures. And for this video, I'm only going to demonstrate one arch. We can just extrapolate all the same stuff that you would do for one arch to the other one. It's just coming back and repeating that. Okay, so I don't need the tooth chain anymore. I can deselect that. And when you're ready to start making the denture, come down here in the denture panel and choose which model you're going to build the denture on first. So let's do an upper model for this case. And this is going to be a maxilla. And we can go ahead and click Create Denture. Now we'll plan a new denture. And I would generally suggest going ahead and hiding any other models. So I'll right-click the lower and toggle off the visibility. Now this first step, and you can see the steps are number 1 through 4. This is asking us to identify the path of insertion, okay? And when you're doing this, anything that you see as dark brown is undercut areas. So think of the axis of insertion whenever you make a denture. You know, generally it's going to be coming in from the front of the mouth, so I can move this arrow to come in from the anterior, and it's going to be going in and up towards that maxillary arch. I usually just make this straight on, okay, so more or less splitting the difference here in 8 and 9. And now, when I do that, you see how that's minimized almost all of the undercuts. Think if you were doing this in wax and you were making bite rims, it'd be very difficult to visualize if you had an undercut. So you would probably end up going in with some wax and blocking out a lot of detail, and your record base would suffer because of that, right? So here I can see exactly where they are, and now I have the option to either remove the undercuts or to maintain the undercuts. So which should you do? Really, it comes down to what is your purpose here. If you're going to make this the final denture, then I would maintain all of the undercuts, okay? So I would take this slider and go all the way to the right. So I would allow undercuts up to 5 millimeters, which is huge, okay? However, think about if you were wanting to be able to print this just as a try-in or a trial denture. And maybe you even want to conventionally process it. You want to print a record base and pop some teeth in and do a try-in with that, but then you want to conventionally process it, okay? Have your lab invest it and press acrylic in. Well, if I do that, then the printed denture is going to have to be able to draw on and off of that model. And so if I'm doing that, you're not going to get it to draw on and off of the model if you've got undercuts. So I would take it all the way to the left. All right, so that's the idea with that. I'm going to go ahead and take this all the way to the right. And now the other important component on a maxillary denture is that we want to establish a posterior palatal seal. Okay, so if you've done this with stone models, you could grind that in yourself and just scan it and then skip this step. But since here I don't have one, I'm going to go ahead and click on posterior palatal seal, and now we can design that. So we'll zoom in here. What you'll do when you're at this step, it's ready to start fabricating that. You're going to go to one hamular notch, and I like to go a little bit across it. Hold down shift and left click. It drops a point, and then come over here to the other hamular notch. Again, I go a little past it, and in the same spot, I'll hold down shift and left click. Now when you do that, it's going to make a straight line from one hamular notch to the other. If I feel like I need to move that a little bit, then I can hold shift, left click and grab this and move it to wherever it needs to go. Now you might want a different shape, okay? So sometimes if they've got a big spongy palate, you might want a lot of depth to this. You might want a bigger palatal seal. But you've got all these sliders that can now modify this. So I usually put a little bit of an arc to it. If you remember back to your denture important anatomy, you've got some little glands in the back of the palate here called the fovea palatinae, and you can actually set your denture border. I usually set right to that, but not covering it. If they've got really heavy saliva flow, then if you cover those, then they're going to be pumping out saliva under your denture, and eventually that's going to compromise the suction fit of it. So I would go just anterior to those fovea palatinae. So this looks pretty good. Those are right in here. You can't make them out really good on this model, but that's where they are. And now I could play with the other sliders. We could alter how much of a Cupid's bow you have. This is the depth of the bow, and then your thickness. Okay, so I'll probably make a 1.5 millimeter in depth posterior palatal seal. If you're going to err towards having it a little too tall, because it's easy to take that away on the height. It's very difficult to add to once you've fabricated though, okay? So that's going to be my posterior palatal seal. So in this step, we've set the path of draw and the posterior palatal seal. So when I click this next arrow, it's going to take me to step 2. It will fabricate a new model that, if you needed to, will block out the undercuts, and that also builds this posterior palatal seal into the model. All right, so this now is what I would consider our master model that we're going to build the denture on. So you've got some different parameters here for your denture base. Step 2 is to set those parameters and define the borders. Offset. Now offset is think of this as the amount of spacer. Okay, if you make a crown and you look at the lab software, generally they're going to have a cement spacer, because if you have it a dead zero, there's no place for that cement to go to, and you're going to end up with crowns that don't seat fully. Okay, with a denture, it's different. This is compressible tissue, and if I'm making a denture that is just going to be the final, and I'm going to try to deliver that, then I'm going to set the offset to 0, which is the default. Think again, however, if you were going to make this the idea of a record base that you pop conventional denture teeth into, and it's got to be able to go on and off of a stone model. Well, just like in a surgical guide, the software builds in roughly about a 0.3 millimeter offset. You're going to need to do the same thing with dentures, and because they cover such a big area, I might go ahead and bump that up to, say, a 0.5 offset spacer. That way we know it will seat fully on the models, and you could get these processed without inducing error. Okay, but I'm not doing that. This is just going to be a final, so I've set the offset to 0. The thickness I usually leave at the default of 3 millimeters thick. Gingival margin thickness, I usually leave that the same. Now, this is probably one of the things that still needs tweaking, and it will get done in subsequent updates of Blue Sky Plan. But right now, I'm not just overjoyed with the initial gingival proposal. I feel like it oftentimes is a little too aggressive on the anatomy and root prominences. So I like to take this gingival smoothness and just maximize it. Now we just need to define the border of this denture. Okay, I'm going to do this quick because I'm not really trying to make this to deliver for a patient. So I'm just going to quickly go around. I hold down the shift button and I'm just left clicking to drop points. Okay. Now, an important thing that I've seen some people mess up on is that, if let's just hypothetically say that my border was out here, right on the edge of the model. If you do that, and then the software is going to build in an additional 3 millimeters of denture space, well, it's going to fall off the edge of the model, and you end up with the denture-based STL having these huge spikes off into space. So go back to your denture principles. What did all our dental school teachers harp on us about? Having a land area. Okay, now this is for different reasons, but still just as important. So I try to make sure we've got a good land area on this. All right, so I'm going just distal to my posterior palatal seal, and then everywhere else, more or less in the depth of the vestibule. And remember, there's nothing magic about digital. It's still dependent on you doing good work on the front end, okay? So you've got to get good master impressions. You've got to do good border molding, okay? If you try to build dentures on primary impressions or alginates, you will have overextended borders. There's just no way around that. So be careful and do a good job on your models and impressions. Okay, now I've stopped here because I want to show that when you reach the front here again, I'm going to click one more dot, but this is still not closed, and you've got to define a closed contour to this base. So when you can get to the last dot and your last two nodes are approximated to each other, just take the last one, holding shift, and drag it into the first, and you saw how that joined them together. Now I could review this. Do I need to tweak some things? Do I need to move things around? I can hold shift and left click and move them. Do I need to maybe add a node? So let's say if we wanted to get up and over that frenum, if I hold shift and click on the yellow portion of this line, it'll add a node, and I could adjust that up maybe to miss the frenum. Okay, so just review it, make sure you like where everything is. I don't really worry about an area where that outline disappears, but if you do, you could just add another node. Same thing here. Here I'm going to do it to jump up and over that frenum. And then just for the heck of it, we'll do that. So now I've got this continuous border all over the denture, and we are ready to fabricate the base. So if I click next, it will begin fabricating that base. And this takes a minute, so I'll time lapse this. Okay, so the software has finished making the base. And again, this is the step in the process that will continue to improve, because right now I find that I do have to do some festooning on this. Still drastically faster than conventional, but I'd like to get this to where, basically I don't even need to touch this to make it look like a perfectly natural gingiva. But that's what it is right now, so we'll go through how you would adjust that. So you've got the base made now. You've got the overall thickness of 3 millimeters. But you've definitely got some contours you'd like to smooth out, like where it drops into that posterior palatal seal. You probably don't want that abrupt of a change from the teeth down to the gingiva. So let's look at our tools here. We've got an add and remove button, and I'll just go through all these and try to use them in some manner so that you can see them in action. The add and remove tool is it's the same tool for both. It's just a matter of what button you hold down. So if I hold down Shift, that's going to be add. And if I wanted to activate it, I just left click and start adding. Okay, so you see where I've added a little bit there. Now, that was very minimal. You would take forever to do something like that. So I'll just Control Z to undo that. If at any point in this process you need to undo a step, you could either click the back arrow to undo the entire step and go back to the last, or you could just do Control Z a few times and undo the last few steps you've done. So the other thing that you've got here is the tool size slider and the tool strength slider. Tool strength I generally leave at its maximum. I like these tools to work fast unless I'm making very small, minute changes. Now the tool size, you can either do the slider here, or if I hold down this Shift button and use the scroll ball on my mouse, you can see that that also does it without me needing to touch the slider. So now with full strength and with a larger tool size, let's hold down Shift. And hopefully you can see under that blue dot how this is adding material much more aggressively than what it did previously. Okay, I don't want to drop off quite so abruptly after the back of the second molar, so I'm going to inflate that a little bit with the Add tool. And I don't worry about creases and seams right now because we'll fix those with the next tool. Okay, so I may add to areas where I feel like it's deficient. Okay, you get the idea there. You know, let's suppose I wanted to remove some. This doesn't really need much removal, but just to show you, show the tool, I can make a smaller spot size, and if I hold Control down, you can see that I can erode the material as well. Something like that. Okay, so let's Control Z. I'll undo both of those because I don't really need to do that. I do want to add a little bit more to the distal of this second molar like I did on the other side. In general, I try to be symmetrical with whatever changes I make to ensure that this ends up being a symmetrical denture. And we can deal with that. Now, the next tool is the smooth tool, okay? I find myself doing a lot of smoothing, okay? So I'm gonna just activate it in the same way. I hold down Shift and left click, which activates the tool. And I'll usually keep a pretty big spot size on this. I don't think I mentioned earlier also that if you hold down the Control button, not while you're clicking the left mouse, but if you just hold down Control, that is your strength slider. So if you don't want to run over here and grab the slider, you can adjust the strength of that tool by just holding Control and using the scroll ball. So let's smooth out some of this rough surface up in here. In my experience, most patients like a smoother surface than a highly detailed anatomy. It just tends to bother their tongue and drive them crazy. So I'll keep a little bit of anatomy and root prominence, maybe a gingival roll, but I try not to get too go overboard with the anatomy in the gingival portion because you know it's going to stain easier, it's going to hold food and all that kind of stuff. So let's look back here at the area that we added to. I can smooth that out. So now you see I've eliminated that big crease that I caused earlier. All right, let's do that over here as well. All right, and let's also smooth out this posterior palatal seal. Now, a lot of people are worried about, well, if I'm right here on the border, isn't it going to be altering the underside of that denture too? And let me just show you something real quick. If I was to turn off that yellow model and let you see this, where you can see the inside and out, do you see how the tool is not allowed to extend into the internal? Because that internal surface we're assuming is exactly what we want, and we do not want to change it with any tool. So that is protected. You don't have to worry about that. So if I want to smooth out the posterior palatal seal on the tongue side, then I can just rub over this a few times. And then I'm going to do quite a bit of smoothing on this lingual surface and try to get rid of some of that drop off in the anatomy. And with the tool, the longer you sit on an area, the longer that tool is working and the more effect it has, right? So you can see there on that second molar where I was really sitting with the tool, it really smoothed that out quite a bit. I'm going to do that over the Rugae too. Some people like to put Rugae into their dentures. I generally do not. Once again, I find it to catch food and just bother people's tongue. Alright, so I've done most of my smoothing. Just give this a once over, make sure you like everything and that it does look symmetrical. I do see that there's a bit of a bump right here that we could smooth out. And then I'm ready to go ahead and just see if there's any final tweaking. Now the last tool I'd show here is the local deform. Now when you need to make big changes, like that big gap that I had right here that I really wanted to smooth out, the fastest tool to make big changes with is this local deform tool. Because with it, what it does is you hold shift, it's going to give you a spot size. If I use the scroll ball, I can increase or decrease that spot size. Let's say they have a big, deep vaulted palate, and for some strange reason you wanted to bring the entire palate up. I could grab this, and everything under that tool, spot size, I can drag up, okay? So you see how quickly I can add just a tremendous amount of material. I don't know why on earth you would do that unless you wanted to maybe make a centric bearing device. You could extrude up a little piece like that. So Control Z, that undoes it. What I will do is go ahead and use this to cover up the lingual side of these teeth a bit more. Now that was too much. Again, this is an aggressive tool, so you'll make big changes quickly with this. All right. That looks pretty symmetric. I might smooth it a bit more. Alternatively, you could grab the add and remove tool. You could hold down Control and maybe subtract a little bit and get it just right where you want it. Basically, what I'm trying to do here is cover the cingulums of the teeth because I want those to be embedded down in the denture. It's just like an acrylic denture that the lab processes. They've got to bring that wax up over this enough that it really physically embeds that tooth into the resin or in the acrylic in that case. Okay. Looking here from the buccal, I want to bring out this buccal corridor quite a bit, so I could grab that, pull down. Now there's a directionality to this tool, and it changes based on where you have your spot hovering on the mesh. Okay, so if I wanted to bring something straight out, then I can do that here as long as that arrow is oriented facing outward. Okay. Same thing on this side. Let's bring this out to support the lip just slightly. Same here, same here. And that side is not as much of a deficiency, so I'm just going to bring it out slightly. And you know, it's like any kind of design. You're just looking back and forth. Where could I improve on this? No question, this is the step you'll spend the most time on when you plan digital dentures. At least it is for me. If you've got some super speed method, I would love to know it. But I think ultimately the solution is just to make this automated, where it just knows where gingiva belong based on the teeth, and it puts it there so that you don't have to modify it. So we'll get it there. Basically every tool I use, I usually will take the smooth tool and follow it up and just give it a once over again. Okay, so we're almost there, and I always follow the same general workflow when I'm doing the gingival festooning. Again, if I'm going to err, I'll err towards leaving these borders maybe a little thick, because I would rather do that than have to try to add to it. So last step here, I just want to look at the necks of all the teeth and make sure that they are sufficiently embedded in the acrylic. So I'll usually use this local deform tool. And if you have an area like that canine where there's a little piece of that that's sticking out, I'll go ahead and pull the gingiva over. Same on this central. And this one. And this. Okay, look on the lingual, make sure you've got enough acrylic going up the tooth everywhere there. That looks good. And if you need to, you can use a small spot size. Like, I don't like how kind of boxy this is. I could use a small spot size. And now I like the overall shape of that better. And then some people like to put a gingival roll onto the denture. Again, to me, it might depend on if I'm doing a more characterized denture, you know, something that maybe I'm charging a little more for, then maybe we do that and try to get it really, really lifelike looking. If I want to do that, generally what I do is just use the add and remove tool. So I'll make the spot size maybe something like so, and usually about 50% or so strength, because it can be a little too aggressive. And then I'm going to start, and I don't usually go posterior to the canine because who's seeing that really? So just get right up here, and I'm just going to make a roll right to the other area. Okay, and then look here, the addition ended here, so I'll just roll up and over this. Okay, and anywhere you might have missed, you can go back and do just single clicks to modify that. And you could do single clicks to take away material as well. So right here, if I wanted to make that a little bit more of an ovate type shape, I could just do a couple of clicks. Now back to shift. And that was a little screwy there. I'm going to just Control Z and undo that. We'll do another round. This is what I love about digital. It's just, you know, you screw up all the time, and it's just not a big deal. You just undo it, redo the step, and it's not a problem. Okay, and 2 more teeth. And then maybe use the smooth tool with low strength and just give that a little quick brush. Okay, so this is not perfect or anything. I'm not really trying to demonstrate that. At this point, we're ready to make the denture. So the last step is to simply click the final next arrow, and now it's going to begin processing it, and it will make the sockets in the base. And so you've got a couple of little sliders here. You could maintain a minimal denture thickness. So consider, you know, on the underside of this model, if I turn this off, you're going to have, usually on most cases, I don't in this case, but usually you'll have an area just like in real life where the tooth would impinge into the model. So the software is going to reduce that back so that there's no impingement. It'll trim that tooth. But then we don't want to have any perforations through the base. So what this minimum denture thickness is, hey, in those areas where it's going to reduce that, what do you want the minimum thickness of the pink portion to be, and then the tooth to start? So you could leave it at the default, which is what I usually do. You could bump it up if you want. Let's go to a 0.5 millimeter, okay? Teeth offset, I would stick with the default unless you've already printed some and know that you're having difficulty making the teeth print, and I would start there with a printer calibration because they really ought to with 0.2 of offset. But if you can't get that dialed in, you could increase the offset. Again, that's the cement spacer between the tooth and the base. So you could increase that, and I usually will check this button that says to connect the teeth as a single STL file. That way I can print these as just a full U-shaped arch of teeth, all connected, and be able to just handle one object instead of trying to individually insert, 12 teeth or so. So this is the last step, and we'll click next, and I'll time-lapse this while it's processing. So now you see that the denture has finished processing, and we've got the base with a good internal fit. Our teeth now have been turned into a single chain. If I was to hide the base here, you can see that the teeth are all connected. So when you print this, it'll be one single object and it'll be under the name connected teeth. And then to turn the base back on, do notice you've got two bases. One is just the original base that you created prior to the subtraction, prior to it making the sockets. So if you were going to do a monolithic denture, you could simply export this file and this file at the same time. That would turn them into one STL that you could then print. Or if you're doing a two-piece denture, then the one that will be turned on by default when it finishes processing is this one, which has the sockets. And you can see now if I turn the teeth off that we've got the denture base, we've got the sockets with a little bit of spacer for bonding resin or whatever. And so this could now be exported. So let's go ahead and do the export. Again, this is what will be turned on by default when you finish the processing. So now let's export it by going up to File, Export Data. And we want to export the denture-fin. That's the one that will have the sockets in it, and then the connected teeth chain. So you've got the option down here to export these, and whatever is checked on, it will turn it into one STL. That's how I would do a monolithic. I would turn this off. If I do want to export these as separate files for both the teeth and for the denture base without having to go back and forth doing multiple exports, then I could check this on. And now let's choose where we're going to save this, and we can save it under Denture Demo. Click OK. And now you would be ready to print this. And so you know, I'm fortunate enough to have multiple printers, so I usually will start printing the denture base and the denture teeth at the same time. So, for example, in the Sprint Ray Pro, since it's the fastest of my printers, I can tell it that we're going to use the Dentka denture base material because that's my favorite one currently. 100 microns is fine. We'll import the model, and it will be under Denture Demo. And this is the denture-fin. So we'll pull that in. Okay. You do want to orient it like so, where the teeth surface would be facing down, and we need to add supports. So I usually use the full raft, medium and medium, and click Generate Supports. And now this is ready to print, so even though I'm not going to do it, you can see this would use 32 milliliters of resin, 51 minutes of print time. Let's pull up my other printer. And this other printer happens to be the Form 3, so when we pull it open, we can tell it what resin we're using. This would be the denture teeth. You could use any of the white materials that you really prefer, but we'll designate that. 100 microns is fine on layer thickness. We'll apply that, and then we just need to grab that model and drag and drop it. So the connected teeth we pull over. And the teeth I like to print incisal edges down because you don't want the fitting surface having support bumps on it that might interfere with the full seating. We'll just add supports under this. And as you see, we've got the supports built under this now, and it's simply a matter of going to print. And I don't think I can see the preview here. This is a new printer to me, so I'm not quite as familiar with it yet, but I don't have that material in it right now. But this would certainly also be about an hour print. So an hour from now, we would have the teeth printed in white, the base in pink, and we would be ready now to bond those two together. So I won't cover that since I've gone kind of long in this video, but it's on the subsequent videos going through this. So I hope you found that helpful.